So I want to welcome you once again to Why Move to 64-Bit, part of the JD Edwards webinar series that we're doing here at Trillium. Let's get right into introductions. So first, about me. I've been working with JD Edwards for 22 years. I started in 1999 with JD Edwards. I was out the Chicago office, then worked actually in the Denver office for several years, and then I was out as a field consultant. My background is in CNC, but I've also done a lot in a lot of different areas in both applications and development. I did spend, after my time with JD Edwards, I did spend 3 years as an IT director. So I have spent time on the other side of this call, trying to understand what it takes in order to keep your ERP system updated, running well, doing the best that it can for your business. Then about 8 years ago, I joined Trillium to run the managed services. So as the managed services, we provide services to our customers to make sure that they can keep their systems up and running, and make sure that JD Edwards is running at its optimal performance levels. So a couple administrative stuff before we get too far into this. If you have any questions, you should see on the right, there is a little questions box. You'll be able to go ahead and then type those questions down in the thing at any time you want. I've got Chris Speciale with me today, and Kisha as well can both answer questions. And if there is any questions, I will take time in between sections here to kind of stop and answer any questions if there's anything out there. So feel free to put those in at any time, and we'll kind of collect those and figure out how to answer them the best we can. Another interesting or another opportunity is that along with this webinar today, we're offering a workshop, a planning workshop to help you figure out what it's going to take to get to 64-bit. So as we go through this thing today, and you're thinking about what it takes to get your business ready to go to 64-bit, jot that email down, the weknowjde@trillium.com. You just email us at that, and we can set up those workshops to figure out what it's going to take to get you there. We'll spend an hour or two kind of going through some of it with you and figuring out what the time frame, what the project looks like, and we'll go from there. All right, a tool conversion to convert 32-bit will be at Blueprint 4D. That's June 6th in Vegas, the 9th. And we will have a booth on our floor, so please visit me there. So if you have any questions after this and you don't want to email, you can always kind of find me at the conference. So hopefully a bunch of you are going. And in fact, what we're going to do is I want to do a quick little poll here, make sure this is working right. So find out how many of you guys are actually going to the Blueprint. So hopefully the polls are coming in, people are filling them out, which is great. All right. I can see people are paying attention. I already got 80% of people responded. We'll give it a couple more seconds here. All right. There you go. I don't know if it displays the response, but I will share the response with you. It looks like 15% of you guys are actually going to Blueprint 4D, where 81% are not, and there's still about 4% of you guys that are still debating whether or not you're going to go. So conferences obviously are a very good place to pick up new information, especially like this on all the things that you can come out with both release 22 and 64-bit. One of the other pieces of administration is if you are not signed up for our monthly newsletter, I strongly recommend you do that. We send out a bunch of good information and updates and kind of summarize what's happening in the JD Edwards world from Oracle and other sources. So make sure you're signed up for that. That email address is weknowjde@trillium.com. All right, enough of the administrative stuff. Let's talk about what we're trying to cover today. So the first part of this is what is 64-bit? We'll get into that. And then we'll talk about what it kind of means to go to 64 with release 22. We'll get into several of the reasons of why someone would want to go to 64-bit and release 22. And then we'll get into a little bit more about the technical, how to make the move, how the technical challenges. I'm going to try to save some time at the end for to kind of do questions and answers, because I know, having done this presentation before, a lot of the good communication comes at the end of what people are seeing and what they experience, and kind of getting that information out there so others on the call can know what to think about and move forward with. All right, what is 64-bit? It all starts with with binary. So if you think about a computer, what it really does, a computer is a bunch of electrical currents that flow through microprocessors. And each of those currents can be represented as a 0 or a 1. A 0 being that the electricity is off, and a 1 being when the electricity is on. So the first question that I've got for you guys today is, if you understand binary, what is 1001? And I'm gonna give you a little 4-bit example. So when you think about it, you've got 4 places, and each of these represents a number of 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64 as it keeps growing. And you can kind of add those up to figure out what it is. So in this case, the answer is 9. And the reason that is 9 is if you think about 1001, you've got a 1 in the 8th place, and you have a 1 in the 1 place. When you add those two together, you'd have 9. That's how binary works. Which leads me to one of my favorite jokes. Now I can hear all the virtual chuckles out there. That's why I love doing these presentations online, so I know that you guys are laughing hysterically at my silly humor. All right, let's get into the 32-bit problem. So when computers are first built, they're actually 16-bit, but most of the mainstream computing started out at 32-bit. When you think about 32-bit, it is really 2 to the 32nd. That is a little over 4 billion, 249 million numbers that can be represented by a 32-bit on-off switch of electricity. When first computers were started, that sounded like a lot. Bill Gates didn't think anybody would ever need that much memory, that much space, do any numbers bigger than that. So there were limits on memory. You can only have up to 2 gigs, you can only have up to 4 gigabytes of memory on your computer. Like I said, when you first started out, that seemed inconceivable. You have 13% of you guys just with large disks. Your largest hard drive could only be 4 gigs without doing something special. That was you have to create separate registries in order to get anything larger than a 4 gig hard drive. Networking was kind of limited to 32-bit as well. And there was challenges in how large those numbers were processed. So for example, on this screenshot I've got here, if you put in 2 to the 64 into Excel, it rounds it. It doesn't actually give you the full number. That because has a little bit to do with how Excel works and a little bit how to do with 32-bit. The problem continues. So JD Edwards, when it was built, was always built on 32-bit. It's been 32-bit its entire life. It can't natively handle 64-bit commands. Now, 64-bit computers came out well in the early 2000s, but JD Edwards has stayed 32-bit the whole way. So as time has gone on, many new functionalities and native commands have come out in 64-bit and not been 32-bit. So the way that works is that, like on a Microsoft computer or Linux, they have an emulator. So the underlying hardware is 64-bit and processes those on-off electrical 6 and 64-bit. However, they have put a piece of abstraction in there, what actually does slow the computer down. These emulators let you run things in 32-bit even though you're running 64-bit hardware. Another piece that kind of affects 64-bit is database drivers. Those database drivers need to know how to communicate to the database. You have to have a 32-bit driver for a 32-bit application to talk to the database. When you go to 64-bit, you can have a 64-bit driver to talk to the 64-bit database. Same with print drivers. If you're printing, you must have the right bitness, as they call it, in order to communicate with the printers. Compilers as well are 32-bit, 64-bit. How you're going to compile your code determines what different emulator it's going to be running on. And third-party software, there is a variety of 32-bit software that is still 32-bit supported. You know, we've been doing many of these 64-bit upgrades at Trillium, and we know DSI, RFSmart, RFGen, PC Miller, Vertex, Reports Now, all have dependencies between 32 and 64-bit. They have different versions that are certified under 64 versus 32-bit. All right, let's talk about the answer. The answer is going to 64-bit. And if you look at 64-bit really means that there's 64 different on-off switches that we talk about with electricity. When you try to represent that out into a number, that gets you into the 18 or 16.8 million terabyte range. That is significantly more than 2 to the 36. In fact, it is, you can see it right there. 32-bit is just a small percentage of it. It's also known as the chess number, which means that if you take and put one piece of rice on the first little corner of a checkerboard, but 2 on the next one, 4 on the next one, 8 on the next one, 16, 32, and you keep growing, by the end, you'd have enough rice on your board to cover the whole planet. Of late October, early November, to do with JD Edwards is make it 64-bit. And the way they do that is the Oracle ported their 32-bit functions to 64-bit. So if you're on your enterprise server, there's a system folder. That system folder now has either a 32-bit folder or a 64-bit folder. It had to recompile all that tools code in 64-bit so that it would work. Oracle did provide a tool conversion to convert 32-bit business functions to 64-bit compatibility. That is something that happens as a conversion on your site and all your code. And then clients have to compile in 64-bit during the build package. What's really affected is the enterprise server and your development workstations. Your Java components, your HTML, your AIS, BSSV servers were already 64-bit. So we're talking about programs that run specifically on top of the OSs where we're talking Linux and Windows. So what does it mean to go 64-bit? The first thing that's probably, hopefully everybody on this call knows this, that Oracle has discontinued 32-bit support. And when I say that, it means the reasons why to move to tools release 9255 was both 64 and 32-bit. Their new tools release 926 and is 64-bit only. So the series of 926 moving forward only has 64-bit support. You cannot move from a 925 32-bit straight to a 64-bit tools without going through the conversion process that converts your code to 64-bit. All right, time for another poll. I want to know how many of you are currently running 64-bit? Oh, got to press the launch button. There you go. All right. You guys must be paying attention. I'm seeing a good percentage of you guys already voted. Thank you. We'll give it a couple more seconds for the last votes to get in. All right, so the response came back here. We have 13% of you guys know you're on 64-bit and are there right now. There's 83% of you that are on this call that are currently not on 64-bit and you know it. And then there's a remaining 3% that's not sure. And I will speculate that that remaining 3%, because you don't know, means you're on 32-bit. So you can make that assumption. All right, before I continue too far on 64-bit, I want to talk a little bit of what is JD Edwards Enterprise Release 22. This gets a little confusing, as you know, back middle of last year, it was October timeframe, I believe it was. Oracle announced kind of a new naming convention for JD Edwards. So JD Edwards Release 22 is really an umbrella that covers a variety of different components. So we're talking in that Release 22 umbrella, we're talking about tools release 926. We're including update 6 for 9.2 applications. We're talking all the current ESUs that come out after that code update 6. We're talking about the tools ESUs that go with it, a planner's ESUs. Any user-defined object packages would be wrapped into the umbrella that's called Release 22. And then there's other feature packs that they may be releasing that would also be brought into that. One of the big questions that I get a lot is, what do I get if I go to Enterprise 1 Release 22? So the next several slides here are a list of new functionality and features that came out in Release 22. So these are all as of late October, early November last year, new functionality. If you were code current as of October last year and had everything updated as of October, these all still would be new for you. So even before this, if you were in an older release of JD Edwards, either an older version of 9.2 or even 9.1, 9.0, or some even the older ones, there's a whole bunch more to this list. I'm going to just kind of scan through these real quick and give you a couple big ones that we know are out there, so you guys have something to kind of when you talk to your business about. As things, the reasons why to move to 22. Logic extensions is one of them. Logic extensions is a way for you to add code on the screen without having to do development. It gives you an ability from the web browser in order to do some level of development. This is a huge step to getting people less dependent on development workstations. You'll be able to do a good chunk of that work that you would normally have to require a developer to do right there on the web. Under the user experience, form extensions is a huge one. We are seeing numerous cases where when we're doing these Release 22 upgrades, where customers are able to take their old customizations that had to be retrofitted and turn them into something called personalizations, these using form extensions. These form extensions, personalizations, will stay out there during upgrades and use the standard JD Edwards object. They're able to eliminate, some of our customers are able to eliminate 50 to 70% of their customizations simply by using form extensions. It is a little bit of a process to kind of identify them and do it, but it shouldn't be a problem moving forward. So that's a huge improvement with Release 22 and being able to kind of continuously move forward in the future. More with functionality. There is now 0 deployments for applications. So Oracle has been building on the deployment process. I know many of you guys are concerned that you have to do package builds and deployments off hours. With zero-time deployments, that has a more graceful way to switch between an older full package and a new full package. And this can then happen by as users log off, log in, rather than having to have a clear downtime window. This should give you the opportunity to deploy full production packages during the day with a lot more confidence you're not going to affect the production system. One of the other things that comes out with Release 22 is a whole bunch more platform support. These are the ones that were just listed for Release 22, but along those lines is you have database supports for the newest Oracle databases. You have Windows 2019 support. You have the latest SQL support. All that kind of stuff kind of adds up to a reason why you'd want to start looking at Release 22 to make sure that your underlying infrastructure can be patched, maintained, is supported, and up to date. Some more new functionality. In Release 22, there's data security for bank accounts. So this is a nice new piece of security where any of these database or bank account numbers are, you will get the starred effect on them. And that is by default. You actually have to go back in and enable that if someone needs to see the full bank account numbers. That helps with, concern with cybersecurity and people seeing numbers they shouldn't see. Here's some more functionality in both procurement and manufacturing, a wide range of stuff that's come out there to help improve the end user's experience. By default, you actually have to go back in and management, warehouse management, order management. What this really shows to me is that Oracle is continuing to invest in JD Edwards and bring in what you guys need as a customer in order to run your businesses better. And here's some real estate, there are a few more things in real estate: rental management, service management, capital asset management. So let's talk a little bit about why you'd want to do this. One of the major driving factors for our customers that have been moving to 64-bit is the future-proof JD Edwards. Right now all supported hardware is 64-bit. This 32-bit emulation is not the way of the future. We need to get to a point where you're running natively on that hardware. Third-party vendors are going to start requiring 64 bits in order to move forward. there'll only be a limited amount of time that they will have 32-bit versions in the future, because 64-bit is the direction everything is going. This is not just something that JD Edwards is doing. This is an industry standard. Everything has been moving 64-bit for years, and actually JD Edwards is a little bit behind on getting to 64 bits. This should not be a surprise. Most things are 64-bit these days. One of the things that advantages also wise is that you have larger memory spaces for UBEs. For those of you guys that run large reports and have run into there's a 2 GB limit on a UBE. If you hit that, it does memory violate and crash out. Now, with larger memory spaces, these UBEs will run better and get through the processing. There's also some performance improvements. Because there's less overhead with that emulation, you will get some improvements. We have seen in studies that the decrease in CPU and runtimes in most cases. If there is an Oracle paper, and this link down here gets you to it, to summarize it really is, while there are some performance increases, they're generally nominal. We're seeing anywhere between 8 to 13% on most things. There are a few things that are a little bit slower, but most things will speed up just slightly. And really at that percentage, your end users probably won't notice because your hardware is already accounting for adequate speeds. One of the other reasons that people are moving to 64-bit are the risks that you have for not doing it. The risks, the way I like to describe it is that when you're on JD Edwards, the further you get from current, the larger your risk increases. So when you think about security, cybersecurity is one of the big reasons. Everybody, I'm sure all you guys have experienced WebLogic patching. WebLogic is a notorious cyber attack target. The world out there, and their WebLogic is used everywhere, whether it be JD Edwards or other products. It's out on the web, and hackers spend a lot of time trying to break in, figure out what, and exploit different problems with WebLogic. As a result, WebLogic patching happens quarterly, and those patches tend to be very critical in order to keep a secure system. With JD Edwards, JD Edwards supports different levels of WebLogic. Typically speaking, it's about 2 to 2.5 years back can we get patches for WebLogic. So if you've not upgraded your WebLogic in typically 2.5 years, you will run out of the patching cycle, which makes you vulnerable at that level. So WebLogic patching is a major reason that people need to keep their WebLogic up to speed. In order to do that, it is dependent on your tools release. So you have to keep your tools release up to date as well. Encryption is also a big piece. JD Edwards has spent a lot of time in the last year adding different levels of encryption to different places, using SSL to communicate between server managers through the servers. Those options are now available for you in release 22 that weren't originally available in JD Edwards. So you can lock down and secure your JD Edwards in a much tighter method than you have before. Another reason that the risk is Internet Explorer. I mean, many of you guys are familiar that Internet Explorer has been retired, and ActiveX is going to be retired as well. So things like media objects and import-export to Excel is a struggle to know how you're going to handle them if you stay where you're at. Release 22 has new tools in order to do that don't require ActiveX. So customers are moving to JD Edwards because they no longer can support Internet Explorer in their environment. They need to upgrade their tools release so they can use Chrome and have those tools available to them in an easier way than the methods that have been in the past. Another example is what I call the Chrome example. So because there's less overhead with that, images are dependent on your tools release and what tools are released on. When you're on an old tools release, if Chrome or Edge or Firefox releases an update and it no longer works with JD Edwards will tell you you need to upgrade your tools release. This happened, I think it was in CPU and runtimes in most cases, a year and a half ago, where Chrome released a thing and all of a sudden E1 pages and some of the menus and some of the icons no longer worked. And their answer is that you need to upgrade your tools release. So many of our customers had to kind of move their tools release forward in a quick amount of time in order to handle these issues. If you are far enough back behind and have to address 64-bit and you have to address release 22, you're going to have a harder time moving forward quickly. That could turn a several week problem to a several month problem, and that increases the risk to the business. You always have to be concerned about operating system updates. The other thing with tools releases in 64-bit is that they support the latest OSs. We had an example just recently where one of the patches for Microsoft Windows broke the print servers that JD Edwards can no longer, in an older tools release, can no longer print to the print server. The customer is kind of stuck and had to find a workaround into their printing because they couldn't take a tools release and they did not want to roll back the Windows patch because of the risks for cybersecurity. It became a little bit of a catch-22 of what you do. If they move forward, they'll be able to get that resolved in a much easier way. Another example is, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the Log4j example. Fortunately, JD Edwards was not using that out of the box, the Log4j. Those files are out there, but they are not loaded. You don't know from a risk standpoint what the next Log4j will be. Will it be something that affects JD Edwards? Will you need to move quickly in order to patch that up? Will you be able to? That kind of risk is what grows when you're in an older release. And also things like database support and other support. Example, I've got a customer right now that's moving forward with release 64-bit and release 22 because they are on SQL 2012 and it's reached the end of its life. Staying on SQL 2012 obviously increases their risk. All right. I did not security is one of the big reasons. See if we have any questions, Chris. Especially, is anything out there that we need to address or questions you've got?
I don't see anything out there yet.
All right. Well, guys, remember, if there's any questions, feel free to put them into the chat box over there so we can answer them. All right. 64-bit. So what does it mean to just say, how do you do it? Well, it means you need to get a Commodore 64 and run your MRP off cassettes. Ha ha ha. Another joke. I know you guys are rolling around on that one. What 64-bit impacts? So as we talked about earlier, the enterprise server, we're talking about the tools code, the foundations. You will see a change in your system directory when you go 64-bit. It also affects all your C business functions. That means if there's functions in there that call other DLLs or things, they need to communicate each other at the 64-bit level. What it doesn't affect is the ER code. ER code is a proprietary coding language for JD Edwards, and that is not changed by 64-bit. So we're talking about code at the C level. It affects the development client, similar to the enterprise server. Your system directory is affected, and any C business functions that run on your development client, your database drivers, and your Java versions. So one of the things I was just going to add about the Java versions is one of the reasons that Oracle had to do this is that right now I believe Java is up to version 12 or 11 or 12, I think it is. The last version that Java did that was 32-bit was version 8. So Java is multiple versions into 64-bit only. And for JD Edwards enterprise servers to run, it must have a 32-bit Java. So in order for them to move forward with the Java, they needed to move forward with the JD Edwards Enterprise 1 to 64-bit. All right, let's talk about the requirements that you need for 64-bit. The first requirement, you need to be on 9.2. If you guys are not on 9.2, you will need to get there first. You must be on tools release 9.2.3 or higher. The programs that allow you to convert to 64-bit need to be run on 9.2.3 tools and higher. If you're looking at 9.2.3 through 9.2.5, those are both 32-bit and 64-bit releases. So there is an overlap time period there. If 9.2.6, if you want to go to 9.2.6, you have to go 64-bit. So one thing I will, and when it comes to ESUs, I know this question's been out there. Can I keep taking ESUs if I'm 32-bit? And the official answer is as it sits right now, Oracle has every intention to keep releasing ESUs without bitness, that they will apply both the 64-bit and 32-bit. That being said, technically speaking, there could be a point down the road where ESUs will start being released that are 64-bit only. Right now, that's not an issue. I'm sure they're going to give us plenty of warning that when that's going to happen. But the way ESU code works, there can be something in there that would be 64 bits specific. And it is something that is on the radar with Oracle. At that point, you would not be able to take ESUs going forward if they do that. A couple things, as we talked about, what 64 doesn't impact. It doesn't affect the Jazz server. That's already been 64-bit. Same with all your other things like AIS, etc. It doesn't affect the data itself. So there's no mass conversions needed for 64-bit. Same thing when it goes through when you're moving to release 22. If you apply update 6, there's unlikely to be let me phrase that. There are very few, if any, table conversions you'll have to run to move that. Those are all very specific to a function. It is not like when you move from 9.0 or 9.1 to 9.2, or even further back where there was a large list of data conversions that had to happen and table conversions that happened. So that is something that kind of separates the move to release 22 from when you move from the previous versions of 9.0, 9.1, or 8.11 or whatever. It doesn't affect your database. Your actual database server has been 64-bit for a long time. So you'll have to change the drivers to communicate with it, but it doesn't affect it. Same with WebLogic or WebSphere. All right. I'm going to pop up another poll question here. I think I'm out of order on this, but I want to know, based on that, what releases are you guys currently on? All right, people are voting. Give it a couple more seconds here, or get the final votes in. All right, looks like we got the votes in here. Just for you guys' information, we have 3% of you as similar to 64-bit are already on release 22. 10% of you guys are on 64-bit that are probably on the 9.23 through 9.25 tools releases. You've got about 58% of you that are on JD Edwards 9.2, but now only 32-bit. So this probably applies most of you guys of moving to 64-bit here. We have about 16%, or sorry, it moved on me. 19% are now either on 9.1 or 9.0, and there's about 13% of you guys that is either before 9.0 or on World. So interesting to kind of hear the demographics of where people are sitting out there. All right. Let's talk about some of the reality checks. These are some of the major questions that I get when we start talking about 64-bit. First one is, can I upgrade it to JD Edwards 64-bit in place? Do I need to get new hardware is what they're really kind of asking. Do I need to set up a new parallel system? So the technical answer is yes, you can do a 64-bit in place. But there are a whole bunch of criteria that have to fall into place for that to happen. Your operating system needs to be 2019 for Windows, or one of the newer versions of Linux, or I think it's on the iSeries, it's 7.4. Yeah, maybe I forget the version. 7.4 might be 3 or 4. Your database has to meet the measurement type requirements. Your third parties have to be in place. You need to have your prod and your non-prod kind of separated, but infrastructure-wise, because if you're going to update your non-prod, you don't want to affect your prod to your testing. And your development has to be kind of frozen at that point, because you can't move your code from non-prod 64-bit into 32-bit without taking on risks. So I'm not saying that's a complete true statement all the time, but as a strong recommendation, you don't want to be moving that there. And this project typically takes between 4 to 6 months with the amount of effort. What we typically recommend then is that when you move to 64-bit, you actually update your infrastructure. Most people we run into have at least one component in their infrastructure that doesn't meet these MTRs. And you have to address those in order to get to 64-bit and release 22. Another reality question: can I upgrade to JD Edwards 64-bit without going concurrent? Yes, you can. But with 64-bit, you need to take, there are about 300 ESUs that you must take in order to get 64-bit. So and those ESUs contain, hundreds of objects altogether. And they're gonna affect things at the business function level. So that's related to like C-type code stuff. There's also a mass update that touches about 7,000 objects that goes through the C code and it's a rather simple text replace. It takes a 32-bit function and replaces it with the name of a 64-bit function. Very small, very straightforward. We've experienced great success with that. However, you also have to consider as a business that you've got over 7,000 of your JD Edwards objects are touched. What that really means is that you're going to need to do a full CRP test. You're going to have to figure out how the whole business walks through every parts of it, because your business code has potentially been affected by 64-bit. Once you're going to do a full CRP test, you have to kind of weigh in the values of what code current is going to do. From a technical standpoint, code current only takes a few days to add to your system. You're still going to have to test it. Do the same testing you were going to do when you do 64-bit, but now you're going to be testing applications with your code current. I will also add that some of those ESUs do have the improvements and things in it that will come out with the 64-bit. One thing that is still the unknown, though, is your retrofitting. If you do code current, you will have to retrofit any customized or standard objects that have been replaced with the ESU. That makes, that can be a big effort depending on how many standard objects you have, but it also gives the opportunity, as we talked about earlier, to use dynamic forms and other tools in order to eliminate some of those customizations. All right, another reality check question. Will my third-party products like Vertex, DSI, and Aerosmart work? And the short answer is maybe. These products are certified at a certain version level for 64-bit. Typically what we found is that customers are far enough behind that these products will need to be upgraded at the same time you're upgrading JD Edwards. This takes a project that was already big and adds another level of component on if you have to update these and test them and make sure they're third-party products that use like orchestrator, flat files, direct database discussion will continue to work. It's these ones that have an API that connects directly into JD Edwards. So any custom integrations you have, it all depends how they're built, whether or not they're going to be affected by going to 64-bit. So let's talk about Trillium's recommended approach. Our first thing is we would say we want to start with new infrastructure. Get your base pieces all up to speed. If you're going to put this much time and effort into getting to the latest JD Edwards Release 22, let's make sure you're running on the latest OSs, the latest WebLogic, the latest, all that stuff, so you can patch, and you've got the longest runway to keep support going for that. So that's where we start. What we always suggest then is we copy the current PD, your current production, to the new DV and PY on the servers. That way you're starting with what is known. Everybody has their change management processes, but DV and PY tend to be a little more messy than production. So we always recommend starting with your production there. What that means is that before you start this process, you want to get all your modifications that you want to carry over into production. Otherwise, you'll have to do things like PAR files or rework in order to get them into the other system. We do recommend you upgrade your tools release at the same time and apply code current. Do all of it. You might as well, if you're going to do the testing, the amount of technical work it pales in comparison to the amount of testing you have to do anyway. Then you do your retrofitting. and then you hit that testing cycle. That tends to be the largest time-consuming part of any of these upgrade projects. Being able to run through your scripts, make sure the business is verified and everything is working well, all your integrations, all that. Then you'll prep your production, make sure your production looks good. You might even do, you probably should do a test in there just to make sure, but you want to make sure the hardware and everything's in place, so you kind of test that through. And then at go live, what we typically do is we will just bring over the production data. We don't go through the whole process of redoing 64-bit conversions. We do that. We just bring your production data over. As I said earlier, because there's very few, if any, table conversions and data conversions, that data comes over and it is a rather quick switch over. We normally have a go live weekend, just like you probably have done in the past, but we can normally get that done relatively quickly in order to get you up and live. All right, I obviously put my poll already, so I'm gonna skip this one.
Hey, David, we had a couple of questions pop up, and
Yep.
I kind of answered them out of order. So the first question that came in is, do you have to go from 9.1 to 9.2 first before going to 64-bit? And the answer is no, you're going to do both at the same time, typically, as long as you have separated hardware and or separated services for Foundation to run a separate set of E920 services.
Yep, and along with that goes with my next slide that we're getting to. So we'll get into that. What other question do we have?
The second question I got was, please tell me you have this presentation afterwards because there's an awful lot to digest, and that was the one I accidentally answered out of order. So I didn't answer that one, so that's
okay. I have been told we are going to be sharing this presentation. I'm not exactly sure of the methodology that we're doing it. I think it'll be in an email for all the attendants and where they can save it. But if they're not, feel free to email me. I can also send it out as well.
And then the third question that came in is, we need to upgrade our database to 64-bit version. I'd like to know if you'd recommend upgrading the database and going to R22 as one or two projects. And I replied that yes, you should do it all in one project as long as you have separate hardware for the database, because there shouldn't be any loss there. As long as you're separating your hardware, you're safe to do it all in one fell swoop.
Yeah, you're going to do all that testing, so that makes sense to do that. Your database is probably 64-bit already, but yes, the MTRs would say that your newer versions are supported with various tools releases.
And that was it.
All right. So talking about the path to release 22, there are some nuances depending where you are, and this kind of goes back to our earlier conversation about risks. So if you're on a 9.2.6 tools release right now, and maybe you didn't apply update 6, all you have to do to get to release 22 is apply update 6. If you're in 9.2.3 and in between 9.2.3 and 9.2.5 with 64-bit, which I believe there was a couple of you guys out there, really your path to release 22 is you have to get your tools release and update 6. That should be a relatively more straightforward process than it has been in the past. You have to look at your MTRs, but that means you're relatively current, so you get the easier path. For those of you guys on 9.2.3 tools release, you'll be able to go to 9.2.6 and the 64-bit upgrade because those conversion tools are already in the 9.2.3 tools release. For those of you guys below that, 9.2.2 and below, you're going to have to do, not that you have to go live with it, but you're going to have to do a double hop and go to tools 9.2.5 so you can run the 64-bit programs to convert and then go to 9.2.6. So there's an extra tools release kind of step in there that will extend your time frame. Like I said, you don't have to go live with it, but you'll need to go to that step, and the CNCs and the technical people have more work to do because you're further behind. Back to if you're on XE 8.0, 8.12, 9.0, there is a direct upgrade path to 9.2. You will have to upgrade to 9.2, 32-bit, then do the tools 64-bit to get the update 6 and tools release 9.2.6. So we're talking even a bigger, it's a bigger project, even more technical work that has to happen. For the unfortunate ones of you who are on 8.9, 8.11, there is no direct upgrade to 9.2. You will have to, there will be additional technical work where while you don't go live with it, you still have to upgrade to 9.1 so that you could then upgrade to 9.2 and go through all the steps. If you're on World, if you're on A7 3 or A9 or A9.4, you can directly upgrade to 9.2. If you aren't, you'll need to get to one of those releases before you can move forward to to release 22. All right. So here are a few white papers that I've used for this presentation. I think they're great resources. So when we send this out, you guys can check these out. Great way to watch and see what's going on with the release 22. Let's talk about a little bit of the technical challenges with 64-bit. First thing that kind of is obvious is that the memory footprint does increase a bit. This comes from the white paper that Oracle did. What you'll see is that it all increased about 15 to 20%, but it was linear. It didn't exponentially grow. So if your server has, I can't do the math fast enough, but if it has 16 gigs, you might need 20 gigs going forward. These results are, you have a graph can show you of Linux and the users and how much memory space was needed, 32 versus 64. For those of you guys on the System I or I series, the 64-bit showed very little benefit. It was basically a wash on performance increases. The I series has already runs 128-bit memory registry, and the CPU 64-bit, and the way that it all works together in the I series just means that it's basically the same processing, and you're not going to get any system improvements because of it. Now, this is a little bit of an older number here, but we basically have seen package build times increase about 17%. This has to do with the dual maintenance 64 32-bit as you get going. This is an older number because of the way some of the things that have changed with package builds lately. The first time you do these conversions, the package builds are significantly longer, upwards 2-3 times as long as a normal package build to get the first time through. Once you go to 64-bit only, you may or may not see increases and decreases in package build times, but you need to get to your 926 in order to get some of those benefits that are out there in the way of doing package builds now, and you need to be on the 64-bit to get there completely. Technical challenge. One of the great things about 64-bit is it gives you ability to have a lot larger memory. However, we've had that in our experience, we've had that result in runaway memory. And a UBE now can keep sucking memory up out of the IRA system rather than failing. So one of the things that we have seen is that if you have a UBE that's poorly written and starts consuming a large amount of memory, it can start affecting the OS and potentially bring down the whole server rather than just crashing the individual UBE. It's the trade-off of giving it so much power and resources. All right, one of the other technical challenges is your business function development. If you're writing a C code, you may have 32-bit functions in there that you may have to go back and retrofit yourself. The 64-bit doesn't, the 64-bit improvements really are on things that are heavily in C code, UBEs potentially. You won't see a lot of difference between on the web browser because that's already running WebLogic in the Java. Interactive applications don't contain much B code. That's a lot of ER code. So you won't see much improvement. All right, kind of to recap, getting to the end here, your next tools release really should be 64-bit if you're not there already. Release 22, 64-bit. Release 22 is 64-bit. It is the combination of 9.26 tools release and update 6. So as people throw those names around, you understand they're talking about the same thing there. Also important to remember that Oracle has stopped releasing 32-bit tools releases. So you can go as far as 9255, and there's always a slight chance there's a 9256, but they're not going to be loading all these new functions of featurality that we included that came out with release 22 into that tools release. It would be strictly for break fix and things that they need to do in order to keep their legal requirements in place. The one other thing I would say is I do recommend if you are in the need of new hardware infrastructure, that's a perfect time to go to release 22. If you're going to get new servers, let's get everything updated at the same time. If you're looking to move to the cloud, a lot of our customers are moving to the cloud, particularly Azure and AWS or OCI, getting their systems up there in the cloud so they can be backed up, restored, all the things using those advantages of the new technologies that are around. It's also a very good time to kind of do that Release 22 upgrade. All right. I want to thank you guys for listening today. What kind of questions do we have out there? Anything new? Chris, anything out there?
No, nothing new, but just it's kind of recent. 9256 did come out.
Okay.
So there's a bug fix for a security patch that they released about a week ago. So
yeah, which we thought there was a possibility that could happen, but like I said, they're not adding that 926 functionality back to the 925. It is really hitting those fixes.
So you won't get logic extensions in 9256. That's still cordoned off to 926 alone. So.
Yep. All right. I'll give you guys a minute more. If you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the side. Otherwise, I want to thank you guys for listening today, and hopefully this was helpful. And for all of you guys that's sending a blueprint, feel free to come on out there and say hi to me. If you have any other questions, please feel, I should probably have my contact information, I probably forgot to add that, but my email address is dtoal@trillium.com, dtoal@trillium.com. Feel free to email me, and we will, or reach out to our website. Any different ways will work, and we'll get in touch with you.